The biting wind whipped across the vast expanse of the international bridge during shift change, a constant, mournful howl that mirrored the emptiness inside me. Below, the river was a sliver of obsidian, reflecting the indifferent glow of distant city lights. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost against the permanent chill that had settled in my bones years ago. I watched the weary faces of the departing guards, their shoulders slumped, their eyes vacant, a stark contrast to the sharp, focused intensity I remembered from my own days on the force. Now, my days were measured in the clink of ice in a tumbler and the stale scent of old paper. Disgrace had a peculiar way of narrowing one's world. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Not the usual shuffle of tired feet, but a deliberate, almost balletic precision. A dark van, its engine a low thrum against the wind's roar, pulled up beside a parked armored transport. The doors of the transport, usually sealed with the stubborn finality of a vault, swung open with an unnerving ease. My gut, a muscle I'd long since trained to ignore, twitched. This wasn't the clumsy smash-and grab of common thugs. This was surgical. A colleague, a younger man with the kind of eager ambition I'd once possessed, had tipped me off. "You should see this, Cole," he'd said, his voice a low urgency over the crackling line. "Something weird is going down. Looks like you're old, friend." The words had hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of my carefully constructed apathy. They moved with a fluid coordination, a silent, deadly dance. One of them held what looked like a cutting torch, its blue flame a stark punctuation mark against the dull metallic sheen of the transport's lock. The sound, usually a deafening roar, was muted, almost swallowed by the wind. It was too quiet, too controlled, just like him. My mind, a cluttered attic of old files and forgotten faces, began to stir. The way they handled the security systems, bypassing them with a dispassionate efficiency that spoke of intimate knowledge. It was the signature of the man I'd hunted, the ghost I'd never caught. The Serpent, they'd called him, for his ability to slither through defenses and strike without a trace. He'd vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a detective broken by his own inadequacy. I'd been too slow, too blinded by my own hubris, and he'd slipped through my fingers like smoke. The figures moved with a practiced economy of motion, loading heavy crates into the van. No shouting, no fumbling, just the grim business of acquisition. The colleague's words echoed in my ears. "Looks like you're old, friend." He hadn't meant it as a compliment, of course. He'd meant it as a warning, and he was right. This wasn't just a heist. This was a statement, a taunt, a reawakening of nightmares I'd tried to bury deep within the recesses of my mind. As the van, laden with its illicit cargo, pulled away, disappearing into the swirling mist that hugged the riverbanks, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. The world I had retreated from was beckoning, not with promises of redemption, but with the grim certainty of a reckoning. The ice in my glass suddenly felt less comforting, more like a harbinger of a storm I couldn't afford to ignore. I pushed myself off the railing, the metallic screech of the action a jarring sound in the otherwise quiet night. The wind still howled, but now it sounded less like mourning and more like a challenge. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost against the concrete behemoth that held me captive. It had been a long time since I'd felt the cold seep into my bones like this, a familiar ache that used to signify something. Purpose. Now, it just meant I was getting old. A gruff voice shattered the quiet. "Cole, what the hell are you doing out here?" The night shift supervisor, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stomped towards me, his boots echoing on the metal grating. He'd always viewed my presence as an intrusion, a smudge on his meticulously organized world. "Just thinking," I replied, my voice rough from disuse. It had been months since my last official capacity, months since the badge had been stripped, months since the whispers had become shouts. He snorted, a sound like a dying animal. "Thinking about what? How to get back on the force. That ship sailed, Cole, and sank." He gestured vaguely at the empty toll booths, the sterile, fluorescent-lit booths that had once been my battlefield. I ignored his jab. The news had reached me, of course. The series of heists, each one cleaner than the last, each one bearing the hallmarks of him. The phantom I'd chased for years, the one who'd slipped through my fingers like smoke. They called him the architect for the precision, the almost artistic planning. His jaw tightened. Of course, the precinct's buzzing, high profile, clean. No witnesses, no forced entry, no alarms tripped, just gone like a ghost. He spat the last word, a flicker of unease crossing his features. And the warehouse break-in last week, the one down by the docks, the one with the perfectly cut ventilation shaft. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting away. Yeah, I heard. Strange, right? Strange was an understatement. The same impossible that had driven me to the brink. The same impossible that was now pulling me back in. The methods, I said, my voice dropping to a low murmur, they are identical. The precision, the lack of collateral damage, the way they bypass security systems as if they were made of paper. The supervisor scoffed, but there was a tremor in the sound. You're seeing ghosts, Cole. This is just some new crew, ambitious, smart, but not him. He paused, then added with a forced bravado, we'll catch them, we always do. I knew he didn't believe it, and neither did I. The architect wasn't just smart, he was a force of nature, a disruptor of order. He didn't just break in, he unraveled. I need access to the preliminary reports, I said, the words feeling heavy, foreign on my tongue. For both jobs. He stared at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something akin to pity. You can't be serious, you're not even on the force anymore. I'm not asking for official clearance, I clarified, my gaze sharpening. Just a look, a favor to an old acquaintance. The lie felt thin, brittle. He hesitated, the wind whistling a mournful tune around us. The lights of the city seemed to blur, a kaleidoscope of temptation and regret. He knew my past. He knew what I was capable of and what I had lost. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire bridge, he grumbled, meet me at the usual place. Midnight. Don't make me regret this, Cole. He turned and strode away, disappearing into the dim light of the toll booth. The architect was back, and I was walking into the storm once more, armed with nothing but my own ghosts and a gnawing certainty that this time I wouldn't be allowed to fail. The puzzle pieces were scattered, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something akin to hope. Or perhaps it was just the prelude to another crushing disappointment. The air on the international bridge during shift change tasted of diesel and desperation. 1,000 headlights streamed across the concrete artery, a river of steel and glass flowing into the indifferent night. I leaned against the cold railing, the metal biting through my worn jacket. My breath plumed in front of me, a ghost of my own unease. The contact, a man whose name I couldn't quite recall, a ghost in a uniform, had agreed. A look, a favor. The unspoken pact hung between us, heavy as the fog clinging to the river below. He'd shown me the file, smudged and dog-eared, a relic of a life I'd tried to bury. The first 2 heists, a jewelry store and a high-end electronics warehouse, had been whispers. Precise, clean, too clean. The kind of clean that screamed of a mind that knew every lock, every camera blind spot, every guard rotation. Anything. The uniformed man's voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the rumble of passing trucks. He didn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the ceaseless flow of traffic. I shook my head, the file feeling heavier than it was. Not yet, just the same meticulousness. No forced entry, no alarms triggered. I was grasping at straws, at the frayed edges of memory, trying to stitch together a narrative from the fragments of a shattered past. He grunted, a sound of weary resignation. They're saying it's a professional crew, high-tech. Or someone who knows the old ways, I countered, my voice a low growl. My phone buzzed, a jarring interruption to the melancholic symphony of the bridge. It was a news alert. My stomach tightened. This was too soon, way too soon. What is it? The uniformed man asked, finally tearing his gaze from the headlights. I scrolled through the brief, stark words. Another one, the Federal Reserve Depository, downtown. His eyes widened, the practiced indifference cracking. The Fed, that's insane. Not if I know what I read doing, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. This wasn't just a pattern anymore. This was an escalation, a taunt. The stakes had just shot through the roof, and I was standing right in the middle of the blast radius. We left the international bridge during shift change in a hurry, the uniformed man muttering about protocols and needing to make calls. I didn't wait for him. The city's pulse quickened, a frantic thrumming that mirrored my own rising anxiety. The news reports were a chaotic blur of flashing lights and panicked voices. The depository, a fortress of concrete and steel, had been breached, and not with explosives or brute force. I navigated the unfamiliar streets, my old instincts kicking in, a primal alarm bell screaming in my gut. This was it. The same signature, the same unnerving artistry. I reached the perimeter, a cordon of flashing blue and red lights painting the night in garish hues. Uniformed officers, unfamiliar faces, barked orders and pushed back the growing crowd of morbidly curious onlookers. The air crackled with a different kind of energy, now not just the hum of traffic, but the sharp, acrid scent of adrenaline and fear. A stern-faced superior officer, his badge glinting under the harsh lights, blocked my path. "Sir, I need to move back. This is a secure area." "Cole," I said, my voice tight. "Former detective, I may have some information." The lie felt even thinner this time, a tattered flag on a sinking ship, but it was all I had. He eyed me, his gaze sharp, assessing. He recognized the name. I saw it flicker in his eyes, a momentary pause in his professional facade. "Information, from where?" "From the past," I said, my gaze sweeping over the imposing facade of the depository. The security measures designed to withstand a siege had apparently been treated like a child's puzzle. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving a point, about a ghost reaching out from the grave. "The past is past, detective," he said, his tone hardening. "This is an active scene." "And the methods," I pressed, ignoring his dismissal. "Are they familiar?" He hesitated, a subtle shift in his posture. "We're still assessing, but the level of sophistication is unprecedented." Unprecedented for them, perhaps, not for the ghost I knew, the ghost I'd failed to catch, the ghost who was now, with terrifying clarity, back from the dead. The stakes weren't just rising, they were a tidal wave, and I was standing on the shore, bracing for impact. I had to get inside. I had to see what they'd left behind. Because somewhere in that violated fortress, I was sure I'd find a piece of myself, shattered and lost, waiting to be reclaimed. The air tasted of brine and exhaust, a familiar cocktail that always clung to the international bridge during shift change. Steel groaned under the weight of 1,000 headlights, a river of amber and white flowing in both directions. I leaned against the cold railing, the wind whipping my coat around me, a meager defense against the biting chill. Below, the dark water churned, a silent, indifferent witness. The call had been vague, a whisper from a colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. "Something's happening, Cole, something familiar." He'd been tight-lipped, his voice raspy with a fear that mirrored my own. Now, watching the endless procession of vehicles, the rhythmic pulse of the city lights, I felt the familiar tightening in my gut. It was the same gnawing unease that had accompanied me for years, a phantom limb of regret. I'd been here before, sifting through the aftermath, piecing together fragments of chaos, but this felt different. This felt orchestrated. The heist so far had been textbook, clean, efficient. That was the ghost. He was a shadow of his former self, his eyes holding a weariness that went beyond sleepless nights. "Cole, you came. You answered. It was important." I kept my voice low, my gaze sweeping the panorama. The shift change was a symphony of controlled chaos, uniformed officers directing traffic, the clatter of keys, the rumble of engines. It was a vulnerable moment, a seam in the city's armor. It is. They hit the old customs warehouse tonight, the one by the docks. My breath hitched. The customs warehouse, not just any warehouse. It was a place I knew intimately, a place where the ghost had left his mark before. The same type of secure facility, the same kind of high-value goods. And they took the same things, not just the obvious, the specific coal, the rare artifacts, the ones no one would even know were there unless they had inside knowledge. He paused, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "And they left a calling card, not a physical one, a message." "What kind of message?" My voice was a low growl. It wasn't words, it was a signature, a specific disruption of the security feed, the way it flickered, the exact timing of the blackout. It was him, just like before. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a copycat, this was a direct echo. The ghost wasn't just back, he was taunting me. He was laying out his breadcrumbs, leading me through the labyrinth of his twisted game. The targets, I responded, my voice hardening. What connects them? The warehouse, the previous locations. He pulled a worn notebook from his inner pocket, the pages dog-eared and smudged. That's the part that's got us stumped. The warehouse held imported antiquities. The last heist was a private collection of rare coins. Before that, a pharmaceutical research lab, specifically, a shipment of experimental compounds. On the surface, nothing, but if you look closer, he flipped through the pages, his finger tracing lines of text. The warehouse shipment included ancient Sumerian tablets. The coins were minted during the Roman Empire. And the compounds, they were being developed for neurological regeneration. All ancient, Cole, all connected to the past, to memory, loss, the ghost's obsessions. He'd always been fascinated by the preservation of what was fleeting, the attempt to reclaim what was gone. There was this about reclaiming something he believed was stolen, or was it a more personal vendetta? The Sumerian tablets, I murmured, the words tasting like dust in my mouth. I remember. There was one missing from the inventory. We thought it was a clerical error, but that's the other thing, the ghost never profited. It was always about the act, the statement. My gaze drifted to the city skyline, a jagged line of light against the Inkai black. Now he was making noise. He was leaving a trail, not of blood, but of something far more insidious. He was weaving a narrative, and I was being pulled into its tangled threads. He's not just stealing, Cole, my colleague said, his voice heavy with a sudden realization. He's collecting, and the collection is us, our history, our memories. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to carry the weight of years. The international bridge during shift change, a nexus of transit and transition, felt like a stage set for a tragedy. I had to understand the motive, the why, before he completed his macabre gallery. Because if he was collecting memories, then I was his prize exhibit, and I wasn't ready to be locked away in his past. The steel skeleton of the international bridge during shift change hummed, a low thrum beneath the biting wind. Headlights bled into the mist, blurring the edges of the world. I clung to the railing, the cold biting through my worn coat, my gaze sweeping across the river's Inkai expanse. He was here, or he had been. The precision of the recent heists, the chilling echo of the ghost's signature, it was a symphony of dread I knew too well. He was orchestrating something, a crescendo of chaos, and I was being drawn back into the conductor's pit. Not the ghost, not him. This was a man I recognized, a ghost from a different life. His face, usually a mask of practiced indifference, was etched with a new kind of fear. He held a crumpled piece of paper, his grip tight. "Cole," he rasped, his voice thin against the wind. "You shouldn't be here." I pushed off the railing, my boots crunching on scattered gravel. "You're the one who called me, said you had something about him." He glanced nervously at the passing cars, their occupants oblivious to the drama unfolding on the periphery. "It's not what you think, not anymore." He fumbled with the paper, his hands trembling. "They're watching, all of them, the ones from back then." My gut tightened. "Who's watching? What are you talking about?" He thrust the paper into my hand. It was a receipt, a mundane thing for a single, high-end lock-picking set, dated yesterday. Purchased from a small shop across town, a place I dismissed as too low profile for the ghost's elaborate operations. "This is it," I demanded, my voice hardening. "A receipt. Not the ghost's work," the informant stammered. "This is different. He's not alone anymore, Cole. He's got partners. The ghost had always been a solitary predator, his brilliance a singular, terrifying force. The idea of him collaborating, of his meticulous methods being diluted or amplified by others, was a disquieting thought. "Who?" I pressed, my eyes locked on the informants. "Who are they?" He shook his head, a frantic, jerky movement. "I don't know names, just, they said he's gone back to his roots, to where it all started." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history, where it all started. The old warehouse district, a labyrinth of decaying brick and forgotten industry. The place where my own past had fractured, not a reflection, a deliberate, targeted light. My body tensed, every instinct screaming danger. "Get down!" I shoved the informant, propelling him towards the relative cover of a concrete pillar. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. He'd served his purpose, and now he was just another liability. The receipt, still clutched in my hand, felt like a betrayal, a carefully laid trap. The ghost, or whoever was pulling the strings, knew I was here. They'd anticipated my every move. Another shot rang out, closer this time, splintering the concrete near my head. I rolled, the rough surface scraping my skin, the metallic tang of adrenaline filling my mouth. My mind raced, replaying the informant's words. He's got partners. These weren't the ghost's usual games. This was brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly real. I drew my own weapon. The familiar weighed a small comfort in the rising tide of chaos. My breath hitched. The informant, he'd said they were watching. Had he been set up to lead me into this? Or was he just another pawn sacrificed to buy time? Nothing. The ghost was back, yes, but he was no longer the solitary specter I remembered. He was a phantom with a crew, and they were cleaning house. My confrontation had yielded not a breakthrough, but a devastating setback. I was exposed, outmaneuvered, and the carefully constructed pieces of this new puzzle had just been violently scattered. The bridge, a symbol of connection, had become a chasm, and I was teetering on the edge. The glint. It was a shard of glass, I realized, catching the sickly orange glow of the sodium lamps that lined the international bridge during shift change. Not the sharp, metallic glint of a weapon, but something far more mundane. Yet it snagged my attention, a tiny snag in the frayed fabric of the night. I'd been staring into the inky blackness beneath the colossal structure, the rumble of trucks overhead a constant, low growl, my mind still wrestling with the echoes of the previous encounter. The stranger's words, a venomous whisper about beginnings, about this very place. My gaze drifted from the glass to the scarred concrete pilings. Graffiti, layers upon layers of it, a testament to the passage of time and countless forgotten hands. But beneath it, or perhaps etched into it, were faint scratches, not random vandalism. These were deliberate, precise. I knelt, the damp chill seeping through my worn jeans, and traced them with a fingertip. They formed patterns, angular and almost geometric, like a coded language. I'd seen something like this before, a long, long time ago. A flicker of a memory, an image I tried to bury. The air here, beneath the international bridge during shift change, was thick with the exhaust fumes of idling engines and the metallic tang of the river. I stood, the pattern still imprinted on my mind's eye. They were a signature, a calling card. The same signature I'd dismissed as a fluke, a coincidence, years ago. The same signature that was now being replicated in the precision of these heists, each one a mirror image of the killer I'd hunted, the killer I'd failed to catch. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the open expanse, carrying with it the distant wail of sirens. My muscles tensed. Were they looking for me, or for the ghost that seemed to be stalking the city again? I pulled my collar tighter, the rough wool of familiar comfort. This wasn't just about stopping a thief anymore. I moved away from the pilings, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The shift change was in full swing. Headlights streamed across the bridge in both directions, a relentless tide of light. Security guards, their faces impassive behind tinted visors, patrolled the perimeter. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The heists were too clean, too precise. They weren't about brute force or opportunism. They were about knowledge, about anticipating every move, every countermeasure. The stolen goods, not cash, not jewels, but specific pieces of technology, each one seemingly insignificant on its own, but together. Together they formed a disturbing mosaic. Components, building blocks for what? I remembered a detail from the third heist, the one at the research facility. A specific server room, supposedly inaccessible. Yet the logs showed a brief, inexplicable system anomaly, A window of precisely 7 minutes where access was granted. 7 minutes. The same amount of time it took to bypass the security protocols on a particular type of data encryption. The encryption used by the company that had been contracted to develop the city's new surveillance network. A network designed to be impenetrable. My breath hitched. The patterns, the timing, the stolen components, it wasn't about the money. It was about access, about control. Someone wasn't just stealing technology, they were stealing the keys to the kingdom. It had to be him. The ghost, the killer, but why now, after all these years, and why the heists? It didn't fit the profile of the killer I'd chased. His motive had been raw, visceral, unless the heists weren't the end game, unless they were a means to an end, a way to acquire the resources for something far more ambitious, something that would make the previous murders look like a rehearsal. I looked back at the bridge, the endless stream of vehicles, a silent testament to the city's relentless pulse. Each car, each truck, a potential data point. Each person, a potential target. The surveillance network, once lauded as the pinnacle of security, was now the ultimate vulnerability. This wasn't just about catching a killer. This was about preventing a city from being held hostage. He was using it. He was using my failure, my blind spots, to orchestrate his masterpiece. And I was the only one who could see the threads connecting the shattered pieces. The only one who knew the true, terrifying design. The shard of glass, a sliver no bigger than my thumbnail, lay nestled in the grime beside a discarded cigarette butt. I knelt, my knees protesting the damp concrete of the international bridge during shift change. The air here was a thick brew of exhaust fumes and the metallic tang of the river, a familiar acrid perfume from my old life. The glint wasn't a weapon, no, but it was out of place. A tiny, fractured piece of something manufactured, something that didn't belong amongst the detritus of late-night crossings. I'd seen it before, in the periphery of my vision, a fleeting spark that drew my eye. Now here it held my gaze. My fingers, calloused and rough, brushed away the grit. It was a piece of a lens, I realized, from a pair of spectacles. Expensive ones, judging by the faint etching on the edge, a stylized initial I couldn't quite make out. Why would someone lose a piece of their glasses here at this hour? It was a question that gnawed, a loose thread I couldn't resist pulling. A low rumble vibrated through the bridge. The heavy thrum of a cargo truck accelerating, its twin headlights carving through the mist clinging to the asphalt. The shift change. A brief, chaotic ballet of headlights and idling engines, a symphony of metal and impatience. It was a constant, a predictable rhythm that had once been the pulse of my world. Now it was just noise. I pocketed the glass shard, its coolness a stark contrast to the heat that had begun to prickle at my skin. This wasn't just about a string of heists anymore. The precision, the chillingly familiar modus operandi, it all pointed to a ghost I thought I'd buried deep. And now, this tiny fragment, a forgotten casualty of a hurried departure, felt like a whisper from that same specter. My unmarked car, a battered relic that had seen better days, idled a few blocks away, its engine a low growl of discontent. The city lights bled into the fog, painting the world in shades of bruised purple and sickly yellow. I drove, the shard of glass warm in my pocket, replaying the details of the last few days. It was the same signature, the same intricate dance of disruption and disappearance. But this time the stakes felt sharper, more immediate. The detective, a younger man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a thirst for glory, had been surprisingly cooperative, feeding me scraps of information he deemed too insignificant for the official channels. The warehouse loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. The air here was heavy with the scent of brine and decay, the ghosts of industry long past. My hand rested on the worn leather of my steering wheel, a familiar comfort. I slipped out of the car, moving with a practiced stealth that still felt alien after all these years. I circled the perimeter, my eyes scanning for any sign of forced entry, any flicker of movement. Nothing. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then I saw it. A faint light seeping from a crack in a massive metal loading door. Not a steady beam, but a pulsing glow like a dying ember. My gut tightened. This was it, the heart of the operation. I found a loose panel near the base of the door, pried it open with a crowbar I kept tucked away for such occasions. The metal groaned in protest, a sound that scraped against my nerves. I squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough edges of the metal tearing at my jacket. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of old machinery. The pulsing light emanated from a single bare bulb dangling precariously from a frayed wire, illuminating a makeshift workspace. Tools lay scattered across a scarred workbench, intricate wiring, specialized cutting implements, and small, sophisticated electronic devices. This was more than just a fence's den. This was a craftsman's studio, and then I saw it. On the workbench, laid out with meticulous care, was a photograph. My photograph. It was a candid shot taken years ago from one of my old cases. Behind me, blurred but recognizable, was the face of the detective I'd once worked with, the one who'd been lost. The photograph had been defaced. A single, jagged tear ran right through his image, as if to emphasize his absence, his failure. My breath hitched. This wasn't random. This wasn't just about the heists. This was personal. The shard of glass, the meticulous planning, the chosen targets, it was all a message. A twisted, taunting echo of my past. The architect wasn't just stealing. He was playing a game, and I was now the unwilling centerpiece. The air here was a thick brew of exhaust fumes and the metallic tang of the river, a familiar perfume that always clung to my coat like a second skin. The shard glinted, not with the cheap sparkle of common glass, but with a fractured, almost crystalline light. The same kind of light I'd seen in the shattered remnants of my career, in the hollow eyes of the victims. This wasn't just a copycat. The meticulousness, the almost artistic precision of the heists, they echoed the ghost who'd haunted my nightmares for years. And now, this small, sharp reminder, left deliberately at the scene of the latest breach. A taunt or a breadcrumb. My gloved fingers carefully lifted the shard. Under the flickering sodium lamps of the bridge, it seemed to absorb the meager light, then push it back out, distorted. A broken mirror reflecting a broken man. That was me. That was the killer's canvas. I stood, the cold seeping through my worn soles. The noise of the shift change was a symphony of grinding metal and distant horns, a lullaby for the city's restless heart. They thought they were clever leaving this. They thought I was still the detective who'd been broken by their game. But broken things could be reforged. They could become sharper. Anything, Cole. The voice, gruff and laced with the perpetual weariness of a long shift, came from the uniformed officer leaning against his patrol car. I held up the tiny piece of glass, the movement deliberate. Just a souvenir for the collection. My voice was rough, a sound I barely recognized as my own anymore. They're getting bolder, or maybe just messier. The officer grunted, his gaze sweeping the empty expanse of the bridge. Messier is good for us, means they'll slip up. I didn't correct him, let him believe it, let them all believe it. Their slipping up was my opening. Their mess was my meticulously crafted trap. Back in my cramped, permanent temporary office, a converted shipping container overlooking the docks, the blueprints were spread across my desk. The abandoned cannery. It was the perfect echo chamber for the killer's warped sense of artistry. Exposed brick, rusting machinery, the ghosts of forgotten labor. And most importantly, a network of ventilation shafts and forgotten service tunnels that could swallow a man whole. I traced a finger along a faded diagram. The killer's MO was always the same. Exploit a weakness, disappear without a trace, leave a signature. The signature was the glass, always glass. A shard, a pattern, a specific type, and the weakness. Always something valuable, something intangible, something that represented control. This time, it wasn't money or jewels. It was data. Encrypted, sensitive, the kind of information that could cripple reputations and topple empires. The target was a secure data storage facility on the far side of the industrial district. A modern fortress of steel and concrete that supposedly defied intrusion. But the killer had a knack for finding the cracks in even the most polished surfaces. And my knowledge of their methods, The years I'd spent dissecting their every move was my greatest weapon. I'd walked the routes, smelled the air, felt the pulse of the city at the times they'd struck. The trap had to be perfect, not just to catch the killer but to expose them, to dismantle the myth they'd so carefully constructed. They'd used the cannery before, a staging ground for their earlier work. It was a familiar haunt, a place where they felt comfortable, and that comfort, I knew, was their undoing. I'd planted the bait myself, a carefully curated data packet designed to mimic the real thing, laced with a digital beacon only I could trace. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice, but the alternative was to wait for the next shattered piece of glass to appear. The tension in the air was a physical thing, a humming vibration that seemed to emanate from the very concrete beneath my feet. I was playing a dangerous game, a game of cat and mouse with a phantom. But this time the mouse had a plan. This time the hunter had the advantage. I picked up the shard of glass again, turning it over in my fingers. It was sharp, unforgiving. A reminder of what I'd lost and what I was fighting to reclaim, but I pushed them back. I had to. The city was holding its breath, and I was about to spring the trap. The wind whipped off the river, a frigid hand that clawed at my coat as I stood on the international bridge during shift change. Headlights bled into the mist, a blurry smear of red and white against the bruised twilight sky. Below, the water churned, a black, indifferent maw. My breath plumed, a ghost of my own making, and I hugged myself, not from the cold, but from the gnawing anticipation. This was it, the final act. The blueprints, stark lines, and coded annotations were seared into my mind. Every ingress, every egress, every blind spot. It was a symphony of destruction, orchestrated with a precision that both sickened and thrilled me. Years I'd spent tracing the ghost of the one who'd inspired this, and now here I was, standing in the middle of their masterpiece. Their final, grand statement, a flicker of movement on the far side of the bridge silhouetted against the sodium glare of a distant lamp. Not a security guard, their posture was too fluid, too purposeful. My gut tightened, a familiar, unwelcome clench. I'd learned to trust that knot, that primal warning system. I started walking, my footsteps echoing on the metal grating, a solitary drumbeat in the growing hush. The air vibrated with an unseen energy, a taut string pulled to its breaking point. Perpetrator was waiting. Of course they were. This wasn't a chase, it was an invitation. As I neared, the figure turned. A face emerged from the shadows, sharp angles and eyes that held a disconcerting stillness. Not the wild-eyed mania I'd expected, but a calm, almost serene intensity. "You came." "You knew I would," I replied, my voice raspy. The wind snatched at my words, scattering them like fallen leaves. "It's a shame, really," the stranger said, taking a step closer. "Such a waste of potential. All that talent, all that dedication, no obvious weapons, but that meant nothing. The true danger lay in the mind. And you are." The stranger chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "You've become it." I ignored the barb, my focus narrowing. The bridge was a thoroughfare, an artery of commerce and transit. A carefully timed disruption here would ripple outwards, a seismic shockwave. The sheer audacity of it. It was a twisted kind of brilliance. "Why the bridge?" I asked, my eyes scanning the expanse, the skeletal framework of the structure above, the cables that hummed with latent power. "It's a nexus," the stranger explained, their voice gaining a strange, reverent tone. "A point of connection, a symbol, and a very effective way to make people notice." "Notice what?" "Your ego." My hand flexed, my fingers aching for the weight of a familiar grip. The absence of my service weapon was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly subsided. "Notice the rot," the stranger corrected, their eyes glinting. "The decay beneath the polished surface. The cracks in the foundation. You of all people should understand that." A sudden movement, a blur of motion from the stranger's side. Not an attack, not yet. They were playing with me, drawing out the inevitable. A small metallic glint in their hand. A detonator. My blood, which had been thrumming with adrenaline, turned to ice. "This isn't just about causing chaos, is it?" I said, my voice barely audible above the wind. "This is about a statement, a final testament." Every life is a story, Cole, the stranger murmured, their gaze fixed on the horizon as if seeing something far beyond the bridge. And every story needs an ending. Others are thunder. Then, with a speed that defied belief, the stranger moved. I reacted instantly, a primal surge of instinct overriding thought. I lunged, my hand outstretched, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick metal. The stranger was faster. They reached the pylon, their hand pressing a button. A low hum vibrated through the bridge, a deep thrumming that I felt in my bones. The moment I'd feared, the consequence of my obsession. But as I tackled the stranger, sending us both sprawling across the unforgiving grating, a different kind of understanding dawned. The hum wasn't the sound of detonation. It was something else. A system coming online. My fist connected with the stranger's jaw, a satisfying thud. They grunted, rolling away. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes fixed on the device they'd used. It wasn't a bomb trigger, it was a control panel. You're not blowing it up, I gasped, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. The stranger pushed themselves up, a trickle of blood at the corner of their mouth. A grim smile touched their lips. No, Cole. The hum intensified, a deep, resonating chord. And then a series of metallic clicks echoed from the underside of the bridge. Not the sharp crack of explosives, but the deliberate, measured sound of locks. My mind raced, piecing together the fragmented clues, the subtle inconsistencies. It wasn't about destruction, control. You're a thief. The stranger let out a shaky laugh. A thief with a grand vision, Cole, and you, my dear detective, have just helped me open the door. The wind howled, a mournful cry, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that this was far from over. The climax had just begun. The wind whipped around me, a relentless, icy hand trying to pry the breath from my lungs. Below, the dark, indifferent water of the river churned, a hungry maw waiting to swallow secrets. The metal groans of the international bridge during shift change were a symphony of impending finality. My own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, kept a different, more desperate tempo. I tasted grit on my tongue, a metallic tang that wasn't just from the biting air. It was the residue of fear, of adrenaline, of the desperate struggle that had led me here to this precipice. The echoes of the confrontation still thrummed in my bones, a phantom vibration of impact and desperate grunts. The detective, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, stood a few yards away, his gloved hands resting on his service weapon. He'd been a ghost in the periphery for so long, a shadow of the authority I'd lost, now suddenly solidified, a tangible obstacle. His gaze met mine, and in its depths I saw not accusation but a strange sort of weary respect. We had both walked through the fire. "It's over, Cole," the detective said, his voice rough, barely audible above the wind. He gestured with his chin towards the hulking figure secured with zip ties on the cold, unforgiving concrete. The perpetrator, the architect of this twisted echo of my past. Seeing him like this, stripped of his carefully constructed facade, was profoundly anticlimactic. The phantom killer, the specter that had haunted my waking hours and bled into my dreams, was just a man. A broken, dangerous man, but a man nonetheless. I nodded, the movement stiff. My eyes traced the intricate network of cables overhead, the colossal steel structure a testament to human ingenuity, now a stage for our grim drama. This bridge, a symbol of connection, had become a nexus of unraveling. The stranger, the one who had pulled me back into this mire, had been here too. I saw him now, a solitary figure leaning against a support pillar, silhouetted against the dim sodium lamps. He hadn't fought, he hadn't pleaded. He was the puppeteer, and I, for a terrifying stretch, had been one of his puppets. He confessed. The detective continued, his voice a low rumble. Everything. The planning, the timing, how he studied my old case files. He wanted to prove he was smarter, better, smarter, better. The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. Years I had spent sifting through the wreckage of that original investigation, the gnawing doubt that I had missed something, a vital thread that had slipped through my fingers. Now the answer was staring me in the face, not a complex puzzle, but a calculated imitation. He hadn't been a phantom. He had been a student, a twisted prodigy learning from my failure. I walked slowly towards the secured figure. The air around him seemed to hum with a residual malice. His eyes, when they flickered towards me, held no remorse, only a glint of something I recognized all too well, a desperate, warped pride. My voice, when it finally emerged, was a dry rasp, the imperfection in my design. The words struck a chord, a discordant note that vibrated with the truth of my own perceived failings. He hadn't been the killer I'd failed to catch before. He had been a copycat, a shadow cast by the original, and in his twisted mind I was the key to his own twisted masterpiece. The real killer, the one whose methods he'd so meticulously emulated, remained out there, a phantom still. I had chased a ghost, and in doing so had finally laid a part of my own past to rest. The detective approached, his expression unreadable. "We'll find the original." The wind, for the first time since I'd arrived, seemed to lessen its assault, a momentary reprieve. The tension in my shoulders, a knot that had been tightening for years, began to loosen ever so slightly. I hadn't caught the original architect, but I had stopped the echo. I had confronted the imitation, and in doing so had confronted myself. The disgrace, the gnawing doubt, the phantom guilt, they hadn't vanished, not entirely, but they had shifted, transformed. They were no longer the chains that bound me, but scars that told a story. My story. The shift change continued around us, a steady, relentless march of the ordinary. The world kept turning, the river flowed, and the bridge stood firm. I had walked through the storm, and while the horizon wasn't entirely clear, for the first time in a long time, I could see a path forward.